This is Jason Verney's podcast. I am Jason Verney. Well, the lead up to the London Korean Film Festival 2017, the lead up is over and it's now begun. We've had the opening gala night, which was a really nice evening. I actually went there myself, and there was a little introduction by Tony Raines, introduced the cinematographer of the film that was playing that night, which is a Hong Sang-soo film. The Day After it was called. I'm going to give some more information on that film in another podcast. If I don't manage the podcast itself, it will be as an article on my website, miniminimovie.com. I will say as well that if you go over to miniminimovie.com, you'll see the full schedule of the film festival. You'd also see a breakdown, a sort of a mention of the various strands there are in it, and also the guests that are attending and have attended. And the opening night we had someone in attendance as it is. So it's a full breakdown, full schedule, all the venues, everything. And of course, if you go to koreanfilm.co.uk, you will find much more sort of information, and they've actually revamped the website over the last few years, or our last couple of years. It's definitely better than it used to be, I will say that, and it's a lot more user friendly now. The reason I was mentioning my website there was because not only have I mentioned an article, posted an article regarding the full schedule and all the different strands and what to expect and all the guests. There's also another article regarding another strand, which is Korean noir, which is they've called it Korean noir. Illuminating the dark side of society. When Tony Raines actually introduced that film on the opening night, Thursday night, he went through a couple of these strands, nearly all of the strands, but not all of them, I believe. And he did mention that if you watch those films, you can learn something about the society. But I think he did say he was a bit jet lagged, and I'm not sure if maybe I misinterpreted what he said or misunderstood what he said. He said you could probably learn something about Korean society. Now, I'm not sure if that's correct. It's illuminating the dark side of society. Of course, there is a dark side to society in every country. I'm not sure if you're going to learn about Koreans, let's just say, society, because I think that's how he said it. You're not really going to learn maybe about the society from watching the films that are based on the dark side of society. Especially if they're fictional works of fiction, which these are. As I say, I might have misunderstood that or reinterpreted that incorrectly, but the films in that section, in that strand, are really good actually. They date back to the 60s up to the current day. Some I've seen, some I've even interviewed the director, even the actor in some of the films. So yeah, if you go to my website, you can find those two articles. I also wanted to mention that because this short podcast I'm doing here, and of course I don't know when you're going to listen to this, but whenever you do, this is about another strand, and it's a smaller strand. They had something similar last year, and I guess they've touched on it in other years as well, and it's called Women's Voices. Now, there's three films in this, but there's actually, you could class it as being 5. I'll tell you what they are, just their titles for now. First of all, we have Candlewave Feminists, with a Q&A. That's a documentary. Then we have the film Jamsil, which is a work of fiction, and the Q&A as well. And then we have, this is a kind of 3 films in one session, if you like. I suppose they're kind of shorts. So we had we've got My Turn, Mild Fever, and night working. So essentially there's 3 lots of screenings, but there's 5 films. Now this is quite interesting this year as well, is that although you've got these women's voices, this strand, you've also got Indie Firepower, which also has got documentaries as well as other stuff. And then you've got the documentary strand, which this has got documentaries in it. So technically, in Indie Firepower and Women's Voices and documentary, they kind of all mix up a bit. I'm sure there's one or two others that cross over as well. But I mean, for example, this first one that I mentioned in Women's Voices, Candlewave Feminists. As I say, it's a documentary, so it could easily go into the documentary section. But it is Women's Voices, directed by a female. Her name is Kangyu Garam, or Garam, I believe is the first name, Kangyu. And but I think they put it into this category because it's women's voices, not only as a filmmaker, women's voices in the fact that it's about feminists, and even more so. I've actually seen the film, and it's about various groups of activists, I would say not protesters, but activists and feminists who had their own sort of a kind of agenda or reasons for doing this various activism. There was a big murder. There was a murder that happened to a woman, and one of these groups that's mentioned in this film, they were set up solely from that, I believe. I'd say I've actually drafted a review for this film. It's only a 40-minute film. It's mostly sort of interview based. But the interesting thing about Candlewave Feminists, this film, is that they are doing this. This film is documenting them doing this at a time when the candlelight marches were going on in Seoul. Probably, how long did they go on for? It was a good 6 months, give or take. They were even starting when I was over there last October time, and so this was to sort of get rid of get the president, Park Geun-hye, out of presidency. Ultimately she got impeached, but all these protests were happening, and there was this big protest which was against the president, mostly because of what happened with the Sewol ferry incident, which I'll go into another episode. But that was a drastic thing for the whole nation. I mean, I attend, and I'm kind of a part of the monthly silent protest that we hold near the National Gallery every third Saturday in London, Trafalgar Square. It's a really big thing. I mean, even though the president has now been ousted and taken out of her position, there's still this. We're still showing solidarity with the mothers and the fathers that lost the children. 250 children died in that ferry because nobody put the right measures into rescue. There was a lot of pride that they were going to get someone else to do it, and a lot of false media going on. So there's 250 children or so, that amount, and 304 individuals in total. There's still 9, maybe it might have found one, but there's still 9 missing in the sea somewhere. I actually went down to Mokpo, which is kind of southwesty of Gwangju in South Korea. I went there this June to see the actual ferry itself. Not a great, I mean, it's a very distressing sight, but it's harboured up there. There's families there, there's volunteers there, all kinds of things. But anyway, the big build up, the biggest cause of the protests for getting rid of Park Geun-hye, the president, were because of that incident. There's other ones as well. She had a sort of a woman that was kind of she was a puppet of another woman who was kind of involved in all, I suppose you could say, underhanded things. But the reason that this film is an interesting and it's got lots of conflicting parts to it, which work in a good way, because these are feminists who are marching. They are marching for the same cause. Some of them are marching about these other causes for women's rights and that homicide, what they call a femicide, and other female, sort of equal rights and stuff like that. So they're doing this at the time of these bigger marches. So they end up going into the bigger candlelit marches, which is kind of going a bit against. They're sticking up for women, but their point is in this film, or I mean, they speak to different groups and different leaders of groups and members of groups. But what they were what a lot of it is about is the way people were demonising Park Geun-hye because, let's just say, she was soap operas, or because she was an ajumma. That's a sort of a middle-aged woman in South Korea, and there's lots of stereotypes and bad stereotypes about these people. In other words, they were it's not criminalising, but they were demonising her for other reasons, not the fact that she was a bad president. So there was lots of, as I say, there's going to be a separate review about this film, but this film it's very good. It's only 40 minutes. It's mostly interviews, but it just shows you the complications that were going on behind the scenes in those marches from women, especially. They might not agree with the president, but they weren't demonising. They weren't. I mean, these women that were actually these feminists, that still have their groups now. They were getting sort of harassed, abused by men because even they were saying, "Oh, you are pretty, you are young, you are out here protesting. Why are you doing that?" And even that itself is demoralising. And there's so much I could speak of here, but I'm going to leave that. So, as I say, then you had those other three films, which are My Turn, My Mild Fever, and Night Working, and then another film, Jamsil, which is by director Lee Wan-min. And I had the pleasure of seeing this film twice at Busan last year, Busan International Film Festival. Now, I loved it. That's just my opinion. I mean, it's over 2 hours. That's not uncommon these days. It's quite a slow film, but it's a little bit confusing. It's also got political elements as well, but you can see why it's been put into. When I elaborate, you can see why it's been put into this category, women's voices, because it's directed by a woman. It's also mostly about women. We have the relationship between. We have the relationship between a man and a woman. We also have childhood friends. There's quite a bit of backing and forthing in the film, sort of nostalgia or just reminiscing and even confusion. And that film Jamsil, that's I do recommend it. So I briefly mentioned those there. I've touched a bit too much on Candlewave Feminists, but I will just say a bit more about Jamsil, because I say these two films I have seen, and I don't want to go too much into the three. First of all, they're shorts that I haven't seen. I'm not sure if I'm going to get round to seeing them now, because something clashes with it that's separate from the London Korean Film Festival. But Jamsil, the Q&A for that, with the Q&A, it's got with director Lee Wan-min. But we also have the pleasure of having actress Kim Se-byuk. Now, if anyone who's listening who saw The Day After, Hong Sang-soo's film, and in fact, if anyone's actually looking forward to the closing gala film, which is called The First Lap, this actress, she's a really good actress, in my opinion, and she's in the closing film. She was in the opening film, and she's in Jamsil, and she's probably not a name that you might know. She's not the big names, but she's lately been in a lot of independent films, and she is really good. I'm just going to Well, actually, I was just going to mention one more thing about Jamsil. As I say, it does touch on political things because it's kind of also, there's a lot of talk. It's a very talky film, but that's not to say it's not. It's boring. It's just, there's a lot of stuff they're talking about political way people aren't changing the world, and they're talking about political movements. I suppose there's a bit of high school life, so there's talking about students doing a bit of activism and what have you. But it's far from that. But it does touch on that, and I did like it for that. It was being quite daring, and it was trying to make statements, I suppose. I just want to run through the actual times and dates of these three parts of this women's voices. So, Candlewave Feminists, that film, the 40-minute short, which has a Q&A as well with the director. Also, other people are joining in with the Q&A. I think 2 or 3 different people are. We have, I've actually got some notes here. Teresa O'Brien, who else? Head of video at Algood Magazine. It says the director will be joined by Ifama, filmmaker and head of video at Galdem Magazine, and Teresa O'Brien, filmmaker, artist, activist, and founder of Stinging Hornet Films, who will also show clips from their current work. They're all going to show clips from their current work, I believe. And that's actually the British Museum. It's a free thing. It's probably worth booking online because I'm not sure if you can risk just turning up, but it's free. But it's British Museum is on Monday the 30th, so it's not long now. It's 2 p.m. Not a great time if people are working, but you might not be. I do recommend it just because it's talking so much about the protests at the time and what you didn't really see behind the scenes, and hardly really behind the scenes. They were out on the protest, but they actually created their own little kind of zone where they could all get together. These women in this big park, and they millions of people protest. It's quite an extraordinary 40-minute documentary, even though it's mostly interviews. The 3 films together, which is My Turn, Mild Fever, and Night Working, they are also on Monday the 30th at 6:30 p.m. and there's Picture House Central. You can see how to book if you either go to miniminimovie.com, my website, or if you go to, there's other websites documenting it as well, of course, but koreanfilm.co.uk, or even if you want, you can go to kcc.org.uk, which is the Korean Cultural Centre's website, which is, of course, well, I don't know if you know, but they're one and the same, London Korean Film Festival. That's where it emanates from. And finally, Jamsil is actually on the 2nd November. It's a bit more time until that one. That's 6:30 p.m. But that's going to be quite interesting. It's not only, it's got the director with the Lee Wan-min. As I said, I actually met her very briefly last year. Actress Kim Se-byuk will also be there. I also met the other actress who's in it, but she's actually more of a theatre-trained actress, but she's not over here. And also, as well as the film and Q&A, there's actually a women's voices drinks reception. So that sounds good. I highly recommend that film, but apologies if you expect something different. I can't really. Every film's different. This isn't some sort of glossy action or sort of romantic thing or anything like that. It does have some great emotional elements to it. At the same time, it just says it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes to me, and it speaks volumes to me anyway. So that's pretty much it for women's voices. That's the strand of the London Korean Film Festival, and there are other strands. I'm just going to mention those others to you now at the end of this podcast. I mentioned the Korean noir strand. There's also Cinema Now, which is kind of it says what it says. Current films, indie firepower, documentary, animation, mise-en-scene. That's the mise-en-scene shorts. Artist video. There's also a touring program as well once it's done in London. And then we have Classics Revisited, which is Bae Chong-ho. It's a retrospective of his stuff, basically. So that's it. I'm going to leave it at that. This was only a little short podcast regarding that segment of women's voices. First film in this lineup is 2 p.m. on Monday the 30th at the British Museum. The other films I mentioned. I must quickly correct. Well, I mentioned Picture House Central for those triple bill films, but Jamsil is Regent Street Cinema. That's where that one was taking place. So, lovely venue. So yeah, you can book these now, and hopefully they're not fully booked yet. Okay, and that's it. I'm going to say goodbye, and I will see you. Might even bump into you at the screenings, but otherwise, see you soon. Goodbye.